Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Xolani Gwala, and I'm grateful to be here today. I'm grateful because anything could have happened over the past year, and it almost happened. But by the grace of God, but for one reason or another, I'm alive today, and I really, really am grateful. You know, they say there are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. And that week happened for me to be the week of the 3rd of September last year. It was a Sunday. I had been a little unwell with fever for a couple of weeks. And on a Sunday, my wife decided she was going to take me to hospital. She took me to Morningside. And I was checked that Sunday. And they found that my temperature was around 40, and they were all like, "What's going on with you?" You know, and immediately they put me in isolation and started doing the test the following day. They did 2 tests on a Monday, and by that evening, the doctor walked into my ward and said, "Mr. Gwala, given your age, given your profile, we were not even looking for this, but I'm afraid you have cancer." I don't remember much after that, because obviously the only words that keep on ringing in your mind is "you have cancer." And I must say, in hindsight, I knew very little about cancer, except covering it in stories, which probably helped because I didn't panic. But she then said to me, "Listen, so the next thing we're going to do is we'll introduce an oncologist who is going to assist you." But before the introduction of that oncologist, they introduced me to a gastroenterologist, who then was a little skeptical. In fact, she was angry. She said, "Look, these people should never have said to you, you have cancer before I do the scoping. I'm supposed to check. I'm supposed to do the colonoscopy and the endoscopy, and then conclusively tell you that you have cancer. So don't worry about what they said," which clearly gave me hope. And then the Tuesday, she did the colonoscopy, the endoscopy. By the end of the day, she came back and said, "Well, I'm afraid they were right. You have cancer." So the next thing was to establish the extent of the disease. And pretty quickly, the oncologist came back and said, from what they can see, it is advanced. Now, the specialist who on a Monday had told me that I had cancer had used a very complicated term. She said to me, it had metastasis. And of course I didn't understand what that meant. I didn't even bother. So later on in the week, then I obviously discovered that it has spread to other parts of the body, which makes it stage 4. So essentially what had happened was it started in the colon, but it had moved to the liver and in the lungs. So then that's when the journey started. The oncologist came in and said to me, "Listen, I need to sit down with you, talk you through what is going on." A gentle guy, gentle giant. And he said to me, "Because of your age and because of the extent of the disease, I'm going to throw everything I have at you," meaning chemo. "And it's going to be the most aggressive chemo that I have. And I suspect your body might be able to deal with it." So that was now a Tuesday. Wednesday, I get a specialist then saying, "We need to operate you on an emergency basis because we need to remove the tumor in the colon," which is where it all started. And that's an emergency operation. And remember, I've only just told my wife. I haven't told my parents. My parents are in KZN. So on a Wednesday then, I had to quickly call my brother. He's in Durban. I had to say to him, "Listen, there's something terrible that's happening here. This is the situation. I've just been told that I have cancer. I can't call my parents to tell them about this because clearly they'll, for them it'll be so confusing. I wanted to go to them and tell them this is what has happened. So he goes on a Wednesday, he tells the parents, and they want to come on a Thursday. But I say to them, no, you can't come on a Thursday because I've now been scheduled for an emergency operation on a Thursday. So at least come on a Friday. Then they respected that. Okay, so on a Thursday, then I had that operation done, an emergency, colon taken out. Was an 8-hour operation or something like that. But anyway, so it was taken out. On a Friday, then they came. You know when you and I was in ICU then when they came. When you see your parents just walking into the ward and they are defeated, the first thing they look at you, they're like, and by the time I have everything coming out of my body, I have pipe coming out of here, pipe coming out, another one private part, DDD, everything. And you look at them and they were just defeated completely. My mom is just in tears. My brothers are also in tears. And my father was the last one to walk in. And he walked in, and 2 minutes later he says, obviously, I'm still drugged. I'm in ICU. I can hear a little bit. He says, listen, I think he needs to be alone. But the reality is that he just couldn't stand to see me in that position. So when he realized that nobody's paying attention to what he was saying, then he walks outside. He starts talking to the nurses because nobody's leaving. He starts talking to the nurses, and I remember seeing him through the glass door, talking to the nurses, and that was the last time I saw him walking on his feet. Because 3 weeks after that, he had a massive stroke. His right-hand side is just completely paralyzed now. He just couldn't take it. Anyway, we move. So what happened was, for the 3 weeks after he had a stroke. I could call, but I call once in a while. I call my mom. Listen, so every time I call my dad's phone, it's off. What's going on? And no. He just left now because the plan was that I mustn't be told about this until I start my chemo, because I was in a very bad condition at that time. So it went on. My mom is very religious. So my wife tells me now that, I had to tell her every night, please don't tell him. And my mom is like, no, I can't lie to him anymore. I have got to tell him. Because she feels bad about lying. She feels really terrible that she has to lie to me every day. That my dad is just, no, just went out, he's coming back. I'm going to ask him to call you, So it was a struggle for 3 weeks. But the point was, they were waiting until at least I start my chemo, because the doctor had said, look, he's in a really bad condition. You don't want to stress him now. Let's wait until he starts his chemo. At least if he does one session, then at least we can tell him, which is what happened. Afterwards, they told me, I think it was the first time it was the second time throughout this that I really, really cried. And and the reason why is because you kind of feel responsible for it. It's like, this old man will never walk again because of me. This old man is essentially what he is now, simply because, I suppose, of the love that he has for me as his child. Anyway, so we move on. We start chemo. Chemo is brutal. When people say to you chemotherapy is brutal, chemo is proper brutal. Especially because I had been told that we're going to give you the strongest that we have. So the reason why they needed to give me the strongest that they have is because after all of the scans, they look at my liver. 7 out of 8 segments of the liver are covered with cancer. So my doctor actually says now that there was more cancer than there was liver in my liver. That's just how it was. It was terrible. And obviously, it had moved from the liver to the bottom of the lung. So he says the only, and at that stage, you can't operate it. There's nothing you can do about it. Because if you operate it like that, you're going to bleed and you're going to die. So what they wanted to do then was to change it from inoperable to operable. How you try and do that is you just put a lot of chemo, which is also on its own very interesting because it was also just a mental game. Mental game in a sense that, you know, when some of you may have heard it. So because of the work that we do, 702, we had to make an announcement at work that I'm dealing with cancer, and we had an interview with Stephen on the breakfast show, etc. I cannot tell you the number of emails that I received afterwards. Now, they come from a very good place, but what they do to your mind is a completely different story. For instance, I'm about to start chemo, and I'm getting all of these emails that are saying, whatever you do, don't do chemo. Whatever you do, just don't do chemo. And they even have reasons. No, don't do chemo because statistically, only 3% of the people survive through chemo. And I'm about to start this. And you think about it. And you just become resolute, I suppose, in a way. You just say, look, whatever happens, happens. But I've decided to go this. I mean, everything happened. Everything happened after that announcement. You get somebody sending you an email. Listen, there's a pastor in Limpopo. Then there's a pastor in Limpopo. He heals cancer. Go now. And you get in Zimbabwe. There's another one. And they even send you pictures of, I don't know, some cocktail. Listen, this is what you need to go and buy. You will be fine in the next 6 months. So it gets very confusing. I'm telling you, on my cell phone, I get messages. Hi, I'm sorry, and so I heard about your problem. I think I can help you. I respond, are you a doctor? No, I'm a traditional healer. A friend of yours asked me to help you. So people were going, it all comes from a very good place. A friend of yours, and I then developed like a standard response. Standard response was, thank you very much. I've decided I'm going to try chemo. If it doesn't work, I'm going to get back to you. That was it. It was a standard response. So then I started chemo, first session, boom. And I remember the day, we go there after, because you sit there for like 6 hours. And obviously, it's after an operation because they put something called a port. I have something called a port here, which goes up until here. So you sit there for 6 hours, and I'm, just so many things happened, and I'm really grateful for the family and the friends, to sit there and take that thing, that poison, because chemo is poison. So the essence of chemo is that it's meant to poison the cancer cells, but it doesn't choose. It poisons everything in you. And by the end of it, you have absolutely nothing left, no energy, nothing. So sitting through all of that, and we sit with friends and we laugh, and then. But I remember that day, the first one. After that, you feel your tongue is like swollen, that you can't talk, and you can feel your eyes popping out. You start just sweating, and the 1 minute you have diarrhea, like really crazy diarrhea, and the next minute you are constipated. And everything all happening at once. That was the first one. But I mean, thankfully I go through the first one, second one, third one, fourth one, fifth one, because what chemo does is accumulates in the system. It doesn't mean that because you did it and I was doing it once every 2 weeks. So it doesn't mean that you did it 2 weeks ago, so it's all gone. No, it just keeps on piling up. The fifth one knocked me so bad, that I was admitted again in hospital for 7 days. So what it was, I was doing everything. Vomiting, diarrhea, everything, everything, everything. Where you think, listen, this is it. I'm going. That's all right. Fortunately, they sorted me out, and I went back home. So this was the sixth one. But also, as it turns out, the sixth one was meant to, because it's a cycle, I was meant to do 12. So you do 6 first, and then you do a scan. After the sixth one, then I did a scan, which was in January this year, on the 2nd of January. Went to do a scan, a CT scan. They looked at it, and fortunately for me, the scan comes out and says 45% of the cancer in the liver has shrunk, or the cancer has shrunk by 45% in the liver. Good news, really, really good news, but inconclusive, because even my oncologist looks at it and he says, listen, this is the best we could get out of this. But the truth is, I must be honest with you, because the next step is that obviously you need a surgeon now who's going to work on your liver. I must be honest with you that I don't think that any surgeon can operate still, given the disease that still is there. But I'm an oncologist. I'm not going to make that call. You and the surgeons are going to make that call. But I'm going to do the booking. I'm going to book 2 surgeons for you. Go see them, discuss the results, and come back and let me know what is going on. So 2 surgeons then are booked early January, and then I go to the first one at Mill Park in Auckland Park. I go to him, Dr. Thomas Marumo. Dr. Thomas Marumo looks at the results and he says, chap, these results, this is extremely, extremely complicated, very difficult. And I'll tell you, part of the difficulty was that the lesions in the liver, some of them were cutting across the nerve. So if he cuts these lesions, he cuts the nerve, it bleeds, I die. So he says, it's extremely complicated. I just give me some time. I don't know whether I can do it or not, but give me some time. Let's have another meeting in 2 weeks' time. And then I go to a professor at Donald Gordon who also was booked. Now, it turns out this professor actually taught Dr. Marumo how to do this. I go to this professor, and this professor looks at this, and he just says, Mr. Gwala, I'm sorry. There's absolutely nothing I can do for you. Go back, take some more chemo. Maybe after 12 sessions, come back. We'll see if there'll be any difference. But as things stand, there's absolutely nothing I can do for you. But, you know, I had been talking to a couple of people. There's a guy called George Alagai, and some of you may know him. George Alagai is the presenter at the BBC. George Alagai used to be a correspondent here in South Africa, and I've known him and I've known his producers. So George also had liver cancer, and he also had an operation, a similar operation. And George was taking me through this, and we would FaceTime. And George would say to me, listen, this is what happened to me. With more chemo, I got what they call blue liver. And at some point, he was operated, but he had blue liver and they couldn't continue, so they left him open for 2 weeks so that it calms down, and then they, you know. So I knew about the blue liver and the yellow liver, and I go to this professor and I say, look, you want me to go back and do 12, but you understand that this may lead to blue liver. And he says, yes, I know, you are right, but we'll have to cross that bridge when we get there. There's nothing I can do about it. And then I drop the name of Dr. Marumo. I'm like, but Dr. Marumo says he can do this thing. And he says, no, I know Dr. Marumo, I taught him. But no, this thing can be done. But then he makes a mistake of writing a letter to Dr. Marumo, which is a little arrogant. Not a little, it's actually quite arrogant. He writes a letter to Dr. Marumo in which essentially he says, look, just don't do this. This is too dangerous. It works in my favor because the next time I go to Dr. Marumo, he is angry now. He wants to prove a point. He's angry, and he tells me now that, look, I looked at the first paragraph, squashed the thing, threw it in the bin, and he came to my ward, and he sat down, and that was the most important speech that he gave to me. He said to me, listen, you know, I know you're going through a very difficult time, but at least there's something that we can do about it. I have, and he told me about a relative, very close relative of his. He says, I have a relative who has throat cancer. I'm a specialist surgeon. I deal with cancer. And there's nothing I can do for my relative. But I can do something for you. All I want from you is a strong mind. Be strong here and let me do what doctors do. He had tears in his eyes. I think partly because of the anger. But I think that changed the relationship. It completely, because now you have a doctor who becomes part of your family. He's now become part of my family. He's willing to put his career on the line because the professor who taught him says, you're making a mistake, and is quite prepared to put his career on the line. And so he started. So what he did was, he starts by, you see, the liver has two lobes. Starts by cutting off the smaller lobe of the liver, which had two or three lesions. Cuts it out. He takes me for something called embolization. So in embolization, what they do is they put something through your ribs, and it goes to the liver, and it closes the vein so that nutrients and blood can only go to the part of the liver that they have cut, right? And it grows quicker. Within a month, that part, the smaller part, had grown. Yeah, and he looks at it, it's clean, and he's happy. And then he says, time for the big game now. Now we need to attack the big one that has all of these big lesions now. And after, well, it was on the 16th of June actually, a public holiday, Saturday. It says, I want you here, 7 o'clock in the morning. And I was there 7 o'clock in the morning. They prepared me. I was in theater at about 8:30. I was there from 8:30 until about 7 o'clock in the evening. 7 o'clock in the evening. And he explained to me why it took, because it was a third operation in the same space. So what happened is the organs then attached to the skin. So he needed to start off by peeling them off the skin before going for the liver. And he went for it. Took it out. And yeah, here I am alive. So I'm still on treatment. I'm still on treatment. I'm doing chemo, but much less chemo than what I was doing. I mean, I do chemo and I go to work now, so it's much lighter. It's actually called maintenance chemo, and the reason is just so that monitor. You don't want to take a chance, and until we do the scans and until we know what's going on. But I just want to wrap up by talking about a number of lessons that for me, and again, you get a lot of those questions. People saying, so what have you learned out of all of this? The one thing that happens, and it's quite interesting, yesterday I was watching an interview on BBC with Tina Turner. And one of the things she said, which actually resonated so much with me, was that the way I accept living is the way I will accept death. If you get to that point, and I don't know anyone who's gotten to that point who's never accepted their mortality, that look, it can happen anytime. Obviously, you worry about your family. I have a very young family. But I was at a point where, and I still am at a point where, if I have to die, it's okay. But that's not really the crux of the matter. The crux of the matter is about just what happened in those months. One, gratefulness. The same way that we're grateful to be alive, we should know that anything can happen, but we should always be grateful for life. Every moment, because it can be taken away any minute. And I say this again, and I said it in the video, fittest guy, didn't smoke, I had just done the London Marathon, I don't drink, I eat pretty okay, middle class, what. But boom, stage 4 cancer. So it can get to any moment. So treasure any moment, every moment that you have. Second thing that sustained me is love. Love from everyone. My doctor tells me about patients, sick patients who come to him and they, hey doctor, listen, prognosis is not looking good. But they all, at the end, he says, they always say, but how's Mr. Gwala? And I'm like, why? People are full of love. And people are inherently good. There's just something positive about people that sometimes we underestimate. And that love will sustain you one day. Just one last story that for me also touches on people and how important it is to respect people, regardless of who they are. So I have a cousin who is 8 months older than me, but we grew up together. So our fathers are brothers. We grew up together. We did everything together. Chased after girls together. We drank a little bit. We were naughty together. But he was always strongish than me because he's 8 months older than me. So he kind of protected me. We fought with other boys and we did everything together in Mbentle, rural Mbentle, where we come from. But also, our grandfather in the rural setup was an okayish man. He had horses, he had a herd of cattle, and so we were looking after his livestock, the two of us. So if a cow goes missing, we were not allowed to come back home until we find it. And that means looking for it overnight. So we went through difficult things. If there's a horse that needs to be trained, I was the first one on the horse. And I would fall and go back. So we grew up like that. He protected me, but because of life, came up to Joburg, fly higher, talk show host, 702, things are looking good on TV, what. He unfortunately dropped out of school. He drives trucks. He called me probably 4 times last year. And the one time he called, I think it was the first time, he said to me, listen, I'm going to say it in Zulu first, and then he said, ngiyakwazi strong uzophuma lapha. He said, I know you are strong, and you will get out of there. Now, that meant, and the mind is such a powerful thing. It meant so much to me that a guy who protected me throughout thinks that I'm strong. He thinks that I'm going to get out of this. There must be something. Sometimes you don't need sophistication. Like a psychiatrist who's it's a guy that grew up with you who says, and he says it, with a chuckle in his voice. He says, no, I know you. You're going to get out of there. And I learned that you respect people regardless of where they are in life. Their station has nothing to do with their thinking. There's so much happening around this, and I hope you guys are going to support us. We started on 702 yesterday. We've got campaigns. We're trying to raise awareness around cancer. One of the things that I learned yesterday, just one last thing. I got a call from a doctor at Donald Gordon. We're doing a show live about cancer. Dr. Bebbington at Donald Gordon. He says, we need to do, and you said it on air, we need to do research about what's going on in South Africa. In the past, it used to be that, for colon cancer in particular, that it would be white men over 50. But he says black men are presenting 10 years earlier than white men now with colon cancer. It is an epidemic. We don't need to look at it because black men are presenting a lot earlier, but we need to look at it because it is an epidemic. But there are just so many dynamics. I've seen so many young ladies, 20, 25, breast cancer, Like insane. It is crazy. You saw my colleagues. And nobody spoke about it before I came back. And when I came back, and everyone was like, oh no, actually I lost my mother. I lost my dad. And like, what were you quiet for? So we hope that we'll raise awareness around this.